The Truth About Breaking Into the Movies by Ruth Waterbury. Photoplay, February 1927. Part 3. When my editor bet me $500 that I, a member of the Photoplay editorial staff posing as an unknown extra girl, couldn't break into the movies, I accepted his bet with great calmness and started off for Hollywood. I was very sure of myself. My advent, however, did not rock Hollywood with excitement. My face proved fatal only to myself. No more extra girls were wanted by anyone, of my kind or any other. In the eyes of Hollywood, I was no more valuable than a used postage stamp. I discovered Central Casting Corporation, the employment office organized by Will Hayes, controlled the extra situation. I called there and didn't even make a dent. I tried the studios. I visited every one of them and succeeded only in wearing out my shoes and nearly breaking my girlish heart. First National was my last stop. I couldn't have my editor hand me the merry razz, so I begged Dan Kelly, First National's casting director, to let me play on a set, if only for a day. I confessed to him I really was a reporter. Dan told me to come around that night and he would let me work with Colleen Moore. At Central Casting Corporation, the only office in Hollywood to which calls for extra workers come, and the only office from which the extra can get work, there are more than 4,000 men registered, more than 6,500 women, more than 3,500 children, some 14,000 people in all. From this group, there is an average daily call for 483 men, 195 women, and 20 children, 698 jobs a day for 14,000. These are the facts of the extra situation in Hollywood today. I was wildly happy as I walked across the First National lot. I, that night, was one of those 195 women. 195 selected from all classes of extra women, from beautiful girls of 16 to character women of 60. One of the 195 out of 6,500. Proportions like that give false value. I was inside, on the lot, going to work, going to win a paycheck. I was wearing a makeup which a character actress at the studio club had put on me, carrying a makeup box one of the girls had instructed me to buy, running along with a key of dressing room 15, women's dressing room building 2, in my hand, on the lot, in the movies, ready for night work, momentarily victorious. It is a thrill. I defy anybody to escape it. I defy anybody, once put in touch with it all, not to feel it. All that dreaming, all that romance, all that wealth, and all that beauty mean, are present on a Hollywood movie lot. California, with its exotic atmosphere, is exquisite when clothed in the darkness of night. I walked across the lot in the cool, blue-black air, the scent of roses and mimosa floating up to me. The vague outlines of sets were visible, the vague bulk of covered stages, occasional swift flashes of light, and the subdued chatter of voices. How poignantly, at that moment, I understood the girls who starve and steal and suffer shame to get into movies, to remain in them. What a real newcomer would do at First National, I don't know. Obviously, the first law of the extra world is shift for yourself. I had been told to be there at 7. I was, but no one was in the casting office except the boy who had given me my dressing room key and a central casting check, which I had to present at the wardrobe department to get my costume. There was no one in the wardrobe department save the property man, who looked me over as he might a horse, disappeared, and came back with a costume, complete from shoes to hair switch, all the right size, handed it to me without a word. There was no one on the lot when I left the wardrobe and went along looking for the right dressing room building. I passed the little bungalow which is Colleen Moore's dressing room. I passed the leading players building, the men's building. Finally I discovered building 2 and room 15, a neat, brightly lighted little dressing room with a window that opened on a rose garden. I fancied many bright things in that dressing room, imagined everything except that which really happened. The character actress had given me a good makeup, but my costume extinguished me completely. Dan Kelly had told me I was to be a London woman off the streets. I looked it completely. I had been instructed to be on the set at 7:30. The time came and went, but nobody called me. The dressing room building was silent, except for an occasional slamming door. I ventured out finally in the direction of the lights. The set was a series of streets in Limehouse, London, drab little alleys winding crookedly into one another. The narrow sidewalks edged themselves past tiny shops with dull windows, dressed with Chinese curios. Street lamps burned feebly on the corners, and the roadways were muddy with water, as the scene was to be photographed through gauze to resemble fog. I shivered. It was too real for me. Poverty hung in the air, and hopelessness. California faded into London as a strange depression settled upon me. The other extras came in slowly, stepping over electric coils and puddles. 10 women, 20 men, characters, all of them. They came in singly, sitting down here and there on doorsteps and curb, each alone and silent. Electricians moved toward the lights, stepping around extras as impersonally as they stepped around doors and boxes. The extras did not notice. They just waited to be called to work. There were no stars, no leading actors to give the scene life. We waited. I had come prepared to act for the glory of Twinkle Toes. I had expected to see camaraderie, bohemianism. Now I tried to still my excitement, which somehow seemed unmannerly, excessively naive in this assemblage. I felt that surely some sparkling person would come along and vitalize us. We waited. I spoke to 1 or 2 women near me. They were polite, but I met with no encouragement, and the conversation died. The night lay dark and blue over the hills as the moon climbed the sky. I looked at my watch. We had been waiting 2.5 hours. Suddenly there was movement. Charles Brabham, the director, came on the set. Women, who had sat with their eyes staring out at nothing at all, were swiftly vivacious. Men who had not even smoked slapped one another on the back. Their fierce, terrible desire to please, to be noticed, was heartbreaking. The assistant rushed about giving orders. "You two," he said, grabbing me and a tall woman. "Come out of this store as I count 4. Walk into the center of the road, turn, and disappear through that second gate over there." The tall woman eyed me. Her complexion was capricious. "You're an amateur, ain't you?" she scorned. "I can tell 'em a mile off, and I must say it's terrible putting you in with a professional like myself. Why, if you knew my career, on Broadway and everything, you'd die of envy. Now I'll have to drag you through this scene." An electrician interrupted my apologies. "Say," he said to her, "Tully Marshall wanted to know if you wasn't waiting on his table tonight. I told him we was giving you a chance at acting, and he nearly died laughing." Heavy layers of gauze were pulled into position between us and the camera. The lights flamed forth. We rehearsed our scene. From doorways and shops, shadowy figures emerged on the assistant's count. The ambitious waitress and I, very friendly now, linked arms and did our bit, down the street together. "All right, lights," shouted Brabham, somewhere back of the gauze. We went through our paces. The scene was shot 3 times, always with the same action. Then the lights died and we were told to wait. The moment had passed. Silence once more enfolded the set. The moon rode higher. It became very cold. At 12:30 a.m., the assistant got our names. "Check in your wardrobe, get your pay. Those lacking transportation can go on the bus in front of the studio. Everybody on the set, made up, at 9 tomorrow morning," he ordered. I did not reach Hollywood until 1:30 that morning, but was up by 7, determined to see this chance at extra work through. It took me an hour to fix my face. I had to go without breakfast and run all the way to catch the 8:10 bus for Burbank. I dared not wink my sleepy, made-up eyes. A man sitting in the bus seat with me smiled sympathetically. "This is no life for any girl," he said, "nor for a man who's got dependents. But for men like me, it keeps us out of jail. We're really polite bums. I don't belong to anybody, never did. I was born in a circus, and I've worked at everything. I drifted here 4 years ago. Being a beard," he meant a bearded middle-aged man, "I belong to the only class of extras of whom there's not too many. The casting directors know me, and I work more than most. I live well enough. It's better than panhandling, and no more work." "How much do you make?" I asked. $25 a week?" He laughed. "Don't kid yourself," he said. "There's not one extra in 5,000, male or female, makes that much. Sometimes I average $20 a week, but mostly it's 10. Fancy movie salaries, big money in Hollywood. $10 a week. Central Casting later told me that their best dress girls, society set workers, wearing their own expensive clothes, rarely average more than $40 a month. It has nothing to do with the workers. It rests upon the demand. That is more truth about breaking in. The set that morning was a theater where Colleen Moore as Twinkletoes was to dance for her admiring public, which some 60 of us, looking like a series of misspent lives, constituted. I wore the same costume I had been given the night before. The assistant director told us where to sit and coached us in our action. Whenever the lights were on, we were to smoke and to applaud every act vigorously. A dozen times they started. A dozen cigarettes we each of us smoked, clapping our hands and being terribly, terribly vivacious. A dozen times and another dozen, the action was stopped. There were many reasons. There was a backdrop to be changed, though the stage was shown only in a long shot. Acts had to be restaged. Joe Jackson, the clown, riding his bicycle, fell over a chain downstage and hurt himself. The chain was removed, necessitating a retake. An extra, popular because he was known to be half-witted, was given a bit. Told to come forth singing, get the hook, and he dragged off in agony. It was too much for him. If he made his entrance correctly, he forgot to sing. If he sang, he forgot to agonize. Twice during the shooting, the gilded hook broke beneath his weight. Delays, delays. Big-hearted comic Polly Moran was there to do a dance. "Wait a minute," Polly called finally. "Let me help him." On the stage, out of camera range, she coached the moron, gesture by gesture, while the cameras ground. "Good," called Director Brabin. "The poor devil," murmured Polly as she descended. "The electricians bay like hounds when they are hungry." "Lunch," shouted the assistant director. "Everybody back on the set in half an hour." If you do not watch your makeup every half hour, the natural oil of the skin gets in its work, and your face emerges on the screen looking very like the valleys of the moon. Back on the set, I followed the other girls' examples, and propping my makeup case on my knees, patted and patted my face with powder, regretting that my nose was so intellectually oily. A bunch of ballet girls came in, pretty sweet 16s, clad in pink tarlatan. They had been rehearsing the scene, I heard, for several weeks under the studio's ballet master. They went through their dance, rhythmically, gracefully, but nobody applauded, since nobody had been told to. At 3, Colleen rushed on the set, her dark bob hidden beneath a wig of yellow curls. The atmosphere brightened. She is very alive. She stood in. An electrician ran a steel tape down from the camera to where she stood, shouting the distance to Mr. Brabin. The cameras and lights were arranged accordingly, with one gigantic light centered directly on the star and following her every move. The scene was called. Colleen jumped to her toes. The ballet danced out. The lovely, colorful act went through quickly. We extras applauded. The scene was shot 3 times. Colleen stood in for close-ups, for stills. Then the lights died. She waved her hand to Mr. Brabin and dashed away. We extras smiled. Next to me sat a beautiful synthetic blonde reading a confession magazine. "Don't extras ever talk or move about?" I asked her, amazed as forcefully as I had been the night before by the human stillness about me. She smiled. "You must be new," she said. "It's because we're hand-picked extras. After you get experienced, you learn to keep quiet. Directors don't want you stirring around or having ideas of your own. They're paid to do your thinking for you. Don't try to get off sets or keep fussing about if you want to work. You only get yelled at if you do." She was exquisitely fragile. "Do you like this game?" I asked her. "Do you earn enough to live on?" She shrugged. "It gives me something to occupy my time." She looked at me very directly, searchingly. "I've got a heavy daddy and a sweet boy too," she said, and went back to her confessions. My head was aching. I had smoked too many cigarettes. I felt very tired and untidy. The hairpins of the switch were biting my scalp. What on earth were we waiting for? How on earth could they stand it? Sitting, day after day. There was a stirring over the crowd, wordless but real, like a zephyr going over a grain field. The blonde smiled. 6 o'clock, she explained. Overtime. Every minute they keep us now, they have to pay for. That means they'll begin hurrying. They did. The acts were rushed through. 7 o'clock. 10 names were called, mine among them. "You folks get your dinner and be back in half an hour," the assistant ordered. "You others are through." I was too tired to eat. I didn't want to go back on the Twinkletoe set or any other set that night. The studio restaurant was noisy. Flies buzzed over the cheap cotton tablecloths, the heavy dishes, and coarse food. "Do they always work this way?" I asked the haggard woman sitting across the table from me. "Too often," she said. "About 2 months ago, I got calls for 11 days and nights in succession. You don't dare turn them down. They'd never forgive you. When I got through that stretch, I was sick 3 days. Then I didn't get a call for 5 weeks." "Your face is so familiar somehow," I said. She smiled faintly. "You've probably heard of me," she said, and told me her name. I am so poor an actress, I couldn't hide the shock of it. Not so long ago, she was a famous leading woman. "You're wondering what happened to me," she said. "It wasn't any of the things you think. Not liquor, or dope, or age. It was the fact I'm provident. I tried to save money when I was a leading woman. I got bad breaks in pictures. I sincerely believe it wasn't my fault, but bad stories and direction. My contract finished. I waited for another. I had my mother to support. 2 months went by without work. I hated to exhaust my credit and the little money I had. An independent company sent for me, offering me bigger money than I'd ever earned. I didn't realize what I was doing, playing leads on Sunset Boulevard. Strange that street should be called Sunset. It has been for so many of us, who at 30 are called old-timers. The 100 who do the casting, the little men of the big studios, never see such pictures. I worked steadily on Sunset Boulevard, but elsewhere I was forgotten. When I realized what was happening, I tried to break my contract, but they forced me to play it out. When it was over, I waited for a break at a regular studio. 8 months and a second lead with a new star. The picture was killed in the can. A year holding out for a second chance. It came, finally. 3 weeks' work. My mother died. In panic, I accepted a small role at a proportionate salary. My final mistake. There's a caste system in Hollywood. It's safer to risk starving in your own set than to attempt rescue through a vague thing called art in the lower depths. She looked at her watch fixedly. "It's 7:30, she said. We went back to the set. The scene was a retake outside a stage door. Tully Marshall had to stagger, wild-eyed, out of the doorway. Kenneth Harlan had to come along, shake some news out of Tully, and rush away, pushing us extras from the sidewalk in his hurry. They shot the scene several times, Marshall and Harlan going through the pantomime, gesture by similar gesture, each time without uttering a sound. They dismissed us at midnight. I hadn't the energy to remove my makeup. My costume in the wardrobe, I walked wearily to wait in line before the cashier's window. $6.25 for the day with overtime. $5 for the evening. Out of 30 hours, I had worked a straight 24. She who had been a leading woman was waiting. "Thought maybe you'd like to ride in," she said, almost shyly. "I've got a Ford." We were too tired to talk. We rattled along the deserted roads wordlessly. And that is what it really is to be an extra. Hollywood is no respecter of hours. Dan Kelly rang me up 8 the next morning. "I can fix it for you at Central Casting," he promised. "Go talk to Dave Allen there. He'll give you some more work and some real dope." I could not get in to see Mr. Allen until I produced credentials as a writer for Photoplay. Then everything was wide open. "I want your advice," Dave Allen said. "I've been in the casting business ever since movies began. I was head of screen service, the largest casting office existent until the incorporation of Central. Now I literally don't know what to do. Do you think it would be kinder for this office to starve these unwanted extra people out, force them to face reality, or to give them work whenever we can, if it's only once in 6 months? We get a lot of criticism. We are accused of playing favorites. I assure you we don't. Here actually is what the boy or girl trying to break into movies is up against." He moved over to a shelf of ledgers and showed me the actual classifications of talent that Central uses. Here it is, just as I copied it, printed for the first time. In reading it, remember that under each of these headings, several hundreds are listed. Think it over before you start for Hollywood. Blonde, colored, comedians, character, young, dancers, dress, young, dress, middle-aged, dress, elderly, exotic, fat, fencers, ice skaters, Jewish, Latin, young, Latin, middle-aged, Latin, elderly, long-haired, maids, posing, stunts, swimmers, thin, character, middle-aged, character, elderly, Chinese, cowboys, dope fiends, tall, toothless, underworld, uniforms, waiters, female impersonators, gamblers, gendarmes, Hindus, Indians, jockeys, makeup, Mexicans, midgets, music, policemen, short, acrobats, animal, meaning actors who can play animals, bald heads, bellhops, beards, and butlers. It shocks me speechless, that listing. What good distinction when so many others are distinguished? What good talent when so many others are talented, several thousand times more people than there are jobs to be filled? "Help me get the facts," I begged Dave Allen. "I want them for Photoplay, to save just as many ambitious youngsters from heartbreak as possible." "If you'll give up trying to break in yourself, I'll be glad to help you," Mr. Allen said. I agreed, of course. I was a little subdued by it. Between him and Dan Kelly, I had lost my bet, but the losing of it was going to get me knowledge and facts I never could have secured any other way.